So now that the relationship has ended, paternity has been determined, and custody has been established, the hard work of co parenting begins. If you're ready to stop the drama and work through the trauma, it's time for Co Parent Court with your host, Judge Rochelle Jackson. And welcome to Co-Parent Court, the court where parents forget the drama and work through the trauma. Today on Co-Parent Court, we're going to deviate just slightly because we are recognizing KJ and I have a studio guest with me. So KJ and I are going to talk about domestic violence. And in particular, we're going to go over some stats that she's going to share with us. We're going to look at what a typical power and control situation looks like so that if you are perhaps considering yourself the victim, you can see what the research says about signs of being a victim. And also, hopefully, if you're watching this video and you deem yourself or realize that you're an abuser, that you can stop those abusive behaviors when it comes to domestic violence. So we're going to share stats. We're going to share what it looks like. In general, what we do know and what research says is that there is no typical what a person who's an abuser or what a person who is a victim looks like. Research says it does not discriminate against a person's age, their race, their sex, their religion, or their sexual orientation. There's no model that we can say if you fall into this category, or if you look like this, or if you're this age, then you're going to be a victim or a perpetrator of domestic violence. We'll have a conversation about that. But in general, or we're going to do generalizations and we'll do some specifics, but we're going to give KJ, our residential expert, an opportunity to reintroduce herself to the audience and to share some information about what her focus is in having a conversation with us today at Co-Parent Court. And we're going to end the conversation about, while we typically engage in what effective co-parenting relationships look like, what does that do for co-parenting when it comes to having an issue of domestic violence between the parents? And what are some good practices that we could suggest to our audience for navigating that? So, KJ, if you would, introduce yourself to the audience and share what your focus is for our conversation today.
Hi, as Judge Rowe mentioned, I'm KJ Franklin. I have over 18 years in healthcare administration. Pathology was my main focus in infectious disease control. Doctoral candidate for community counseling, behavior studies, and specializing in traumatology and community counseling. I'm a certified behavior statistician as well. Judge Rowe mentioned domestic violence has been in existence for many, many years. And some statistics shows that an average of 24 people per minute are victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in the United States. More than 12 million women and men over the course of a single year has been victimized. Nearly 3 in 10 women, which is 29% of the U.S. population, and 1 in 10 men, 10% of the U.S., have experienced rape, physical violence, and or stalking by a partner and reported it having a related impact on their functioning. Just under 15% of women, which is 14.8% of the U.S. population, and 4% of men in the U.S. have been injured as a result of intimate partner violence that included rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner. In addition, 1 in 4 women, which is 24.3% of the U.S. population, and 1 in 7 men, which is 13.8%, age 18 and older in the U.S., have been the victim of severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. Intimate partner violence alone affects over 12 million people every year. Over 1 in 3 women, which is 35.6% of the U.S. population, and 1 in 4 men, which is 28.5% in the U.S., have experienced rape, physical violence, and or stalking by intimate partners. almost half of all the women and men in the US have experienced psychological aggression by an intimate partner in their lifetime. Women ages 18 through 24 and 25 to 34 generally experience the highest rates of intimate partner violence. From 1994 to 2010, approximately 4 in 5 victims of intimate partner violence were females. Most female victims of intimate partner violence were previously victimized by the same offender at a rate of 77% for women ages 18 through 24, and 76% or from ages 25 through 34, and 81% from ages 35 through 49.
So, KJ, you gave a lot of statistics, and in my real world, when I real work that I do domestic violence all day long. And what I know from having conversations with victims and survivors of domestic violence is oftentimes the instances of domestic violence, they're not reported. And the statistics that you're sharing, they're high. But the reality is a lot of people don't even report, don't even recognize that they're victims of domestic violence. Where are you getting your research from, and how does that research account for unreported issues?
This research can be found on the National Domestic Violence Hotline website, which is www.thehotline.org. And they conglomerate everything that's reported. But as stated, a lot of domestic violence goes undocumented. So, although those statistics are high and is inclusive for men, because not only women experience domestic violence, men does also, it's still factual, but we all know a lot of people don't always report it for many different reasons. Embarrassment, not realizing that they're in a domestic violence situation, and just for fear of like retaliation.
So let's talk about. I shared with you that I wanted to go over the Duluth model when it talks about power and control, just to share with the listening audience what power and control in domestic violence situations may look like when we hear those instances and they don't realize perhaps it's a form of domestic violence. So this particular will, it's addressing the African American Black community in particular. So when we talk about what it looks like, the researchers took situations that our audience should be able to relate to. So as I share with the audience, and as we do this self analysis, either do you see yourself being abused or do you see yourself being an abuser? So in particular, it talks about intimidation, and this is talking about physical and sexual violence. So there's a lot of type of violence that uh, the court system and the judicial system, the criminal court, civil court, don't always have the authority to um, provide some relief from. So those particular instances may be, and I think we spoke earlier about physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, economic abuse, psychological abuse, and technological abuse. But this particular power and control wheel breaks it down a little further. So we're going to talk about what intimidation looks like. So it talks about in our community, it may be postings on social media to try and embarrass the person. It may be looks that the abuser gives to cause that person to fear that something's going to happen, like you need to fear me because I'm intimidating you. And it talks about breaking things. Is there any research or what you're thinking about the power and control when it comes to intimidation? How does that typically show up?
The intimidation factor to me kind of aligns with emotional abuse, which out of all forms of domestic violence, emotional abuse is the most difficult one to spot. And a lot of people don't realize that they are being intimidated, because it's a mind game. So it's like is playing on your emotions and your mental. Um, I do have like 10 signs of intimidation or emotional abuse that one may be able to utilize, which I know emotional abuse is also on it will as well, but intimidation goes along with it.
All right, let me give the suggestions or what a person may see according to the
Intimidation.
Dilute model, yeah, and then you can tell us what the, recommendations are. So according to this model, it says for emotional abuse, the partner does not allow the person to get her hair done, right, or nails done. It also talks calling the person the N word or the B word. It speaks about negatively talking about the person's family, that, they disappear for a period of time, for periods, they pop up, or they pop in. They're demeaning self-worth. I see why your ex beat you. Nobody wants you, or language words that they use. And the last thing you may see from the abuser is you're just like the other person, some negative person. You're crazy, you're nagging, it's all your fault. So that's the emotional aspect of what power and control looks like. The abuser wants to control the situation by either intimidation or by emotionally abusing their victim. And a lot of times the victim does not even realize that that's a power play, right? It's just their behavior, it's just what they do. And sometimes they offer excuses about it. When I sit with my clients and we're going over, just tell me some instances, and they're saying things and they don't even realize that that's a form of power and control and emotional abuse, and the whole cycle of how things come together with domestic violence. So, what are your 10? Is it 10 signs that you said you wanted to share? What are those signs?
All right. So my 10 signs of emotional abuse. Um, and a lot of people don't recognize they're going through it until they read or hear or being questioned while they like going through an intake process or something. Cause it just seems you intimidated. You're living in the situation, not realizing that, you're being emotionally abused. Number one will be like your partner isolate you from your loved ones. Abusive partners, they demand that you spend all the time with them. They ask for you 100% of your attention, and they get angry when you don't comply. In their bid to control you and your time, they will create barriers between you and your friends and your family. Spending time alone or apart is unthinkable for them. Number two would be your partner verbally abuses you, as you stated. State the N or the B word or talk down to you. Some abusers, they use verbal communication as an offensive weapon in a relationship that they otherwise consider to be a loving one, such as an abusive partner will insult you with derogatory names, disturbing jokes, and even blatant curse words. Whether you respond back or not, they will continue to harass you verbally into submission. And you don't even realize you're falling into it. Number three, your partner uses emotional manipulation. After verbally mistreating you, your abuser may try to manipulate your feelings, leading you to feel guilty for their outbursts. This kind of abusive partner will seek breaches in your emotional armor and use them to get inside your mind, toy with your feelings. In some cases, they will even threaten you with leaving if you don't change your behavior that led to their tantrum. Number four, your partner has an infinite resource of scapegoats. And your new partner, if your new partner always finds someone to blame for their failures and their defeats, you might be dating a potentially abusive person, someone who cannot take responsibilities for their mistakes. If they isn't ready to have a mature relationship, you just might have to move ahead with an emotional abusive partner that can lead to severe trauma in the future. The kind of person that always finds scapegoats will eventually blame you for their underachievements. Number five, your partner uses addiction to escape emotional responsibility. Some people resort to alcohol or drugs when they cannot admit failure, mistakes, or inappropriate behavior. An adult that does not resolve past trauma can turn into an abusive partner that uses their addiction to escape emotional responsibilities. See, that childhood trauma always come up, but people like to just put it behind.
We talked about that the last time you were on the show, the childhood trauma and now
And
we
that
get
plays
to
a
see
huge
the
part.
correct, which is why therapy is important.
Very important.
Yeah,
And a lot of people is opposed to, especially in our community. But you got to work through those things because it can turn into abuse in your adulthood, parenting styles, and all of it.
yeah,
Number six,
exactly.
your partner uses fear to control you. Some abusers extend control over their partners with the threat of violence, even if they never physically hurt you. Their lovers, if they never physically hurt their lovers, they act as if they are always on the brink of doing it. This type of behavior instills fear and forces you to live in constant anxiety. Your actions and your entire lifestyle may change to avoid potential retributions. Number seven, your partner uses physically constraints. Even if your partner does not hit you, he or she can still use physical force to abuse you. Some evident signs of it includes grabbing your wrists tightly, holding an arm over your neck or head in a dominant manner, or concerning you in a room and using their body to block you a way out. These signs of physical constraints point to abusive behavior and it may lead to domestic violence and tragic consequences in the future. Number eight, your partner deprives you of affection. Another sign of emotional abuse is when your partner chooses to punish you for spending time away or not giving them the attention that they demand. In this case, they intentionally deprive you of affection and act upset until you beg for their pardons. Number nine, your partner treats you like a servant. This kind of emotional abuse is difficult to acknowledge, even by the victims. Abusers develop a sense of entitlement that they use to treat their partners as servants. As a result, they demand constant care, attention, help, and supervision as if they were royalty. I mean, I know some people call it old school, but that's like, I would say, the husband or partner demanding that you fix their plate and serve them even if you're not feeling well, stuff as simple as that. But as a wife role, we were ingrained and taught that's how we're supposed to be. But for one to expect that in no other way, even on your sick bed or whatever, that's a part of emotional abuse. And number 10, your partner is extremely jealous and possessive. Oh my. A possessive partner has no consideration for your individuality, such an abuser will try to gain full control over your life, including your dreams, your goals, and personal tastes. Their jealousy is limitless and they will act on it to prevent you from spending time with other people than those of their choosing. All of these signs of emotional abuse point to an immature individual who is not ready to commit to a serious, long lasting, and happy relationship. And if you encounter them in your partner, you should immediately have a calm and constructive conversation about the risk that they hold in your relationship.
All right. So, what sources are those recommendations from?
All of that can still be found a part of the Domestic Hotline and National Health Institute.
So, I want to add to that. I want to finish doing the dilute because you talked on some of these, but in this particular will, it gives what it may look like, right? Because again, so often when I speak with victims of domestic violence and survivors of domestic violence, and people in general, they don't see themselves as being victims. So let's see if we can share what it may actually look like so people can recognize where they are. And with the hope of that, changing behaviors and getting some support to navigate through it so that at the end of the day, I'm always concerned with the impact on children so that behaviors can change and children can have the best outcome when it comes time to parenting children from possibly two different households at this point when we talk about domestic violence. But you spoke about isolation underneath the emotional abuse, but it speaks to keeping a person away from a family and friends, not allowing the person to call the police, to manipulate it as if they are the victim, making the person stay home, spreading gossip, lies, creating division between the person and their families, keeping track of how long the person is gone or where they're gone. They often put trackers on in your cars. They track you through your telephones, those apps so just be mindful that that's part of the power and control that may happen. With healthy relationships, you would hope that your significant other or your partner, it's okay to know where you are, but just take an assessment as to whether or not it's making itself power and control as opposed to just typical behaviors of tracking and placing those AirPods. They place AirPods in their
They
children's
look
when they do.
past
Yeah, when they do I said AirPods, on the AirTags, when
the
they
air
do
tag.
the exchanges, and perhaps you're safeguarding where you are. And we'll talk about that and making sure that people aren't able to track, a person's location. So just be mindful, minimizing, denying, and blaming. What to say, accusing the person of hearing things like, that's not what I said. Like you heard that, you made that up. Blame her for the abuse. And in this particular handout that I'm referencing to, a lot of times it speaks to women or females because statistics says that's the person who's more probable to be the victim. So it speaks to that language. I'm trying to make it generic when I say they, but I do have men as clients who are victims of domestic violence, but for the most part, 90% of my clientele when it comes to domestic violence, they are women. But blaming her for the abuse, you made me do it, it's your fault, or denying that the abuse actually happens. Like, that's not what I did, that's not what I said, that's not what you saw, that's not the abuse I caused, like you got that from somewhere else. Don't take accountability for their own action. And part of the going back to the childhood trauma that we talked about last, I guess, October, when you were on the show, some of the factors would be the person they say they never had a father, so they don't know how to be a father, right? Because my father was gone and your father's gone. And we talk about how the impact of having an absent parent on the abuser and the victim, how does that relationship, a past relationship between the parent and the child impact the child, and as he or she grows to either be the victim or the survivor of domestic violence and the abuser of domestic violence, like what does that childhood trauma, how does that impact? I'm going to come back and ask you if you can elaborate on that. Also, using children, you didn't talk about this one, but so often, as I told you, at the end of this, to come up with a suggestion for how victims of domestic violence still parent with that abuser. So, oftentimes, asking children details about the other parent, where they're going, what they're doing with their life, who they got over, that new man or that new woman. And oftentimes, they don't want, I get to hear both ends. So, I get this when it's the woman, you're bringing this other woman around my children and don't bring nobody around my child. And when it's the men, it's, don't let him cut my child's hair or he doesn't have to bring him to the basketball game or whatever those extracurricular activities are. That becomes problematic when it comes to power and control and domestic violence with co parenting. Training a child to be disrespectful, that person's disrespectful toward the other parent, and they have no safeguards for not encouraging their children. In fact, sometimes they may encourage the child to be disrespectful toward the other parent. Threats of harm to the child, what they may do the child, like they want to take the child away from the other parent and isolate the child from that parent. So that's a form of power and control when it comes time to using children. Privilege, you spoke about this too. You didn't call it privilege. The Dilute model calls it privilege when it talks about using your social status. You talked about the meals, right? But having, the roles that we take on when we have relationships with husband and wives, where the wife is at home, or maybe the wife's not at home. The wife's working and still got to do the role of being at home and cooking and serving, but using status as an issue. Treat her like a servant, making her do all the household chores, timing when she leaves, feels entitled to her property. Oftentimes in our community, they get you got to bring your paycheck home and they give you an allowance for what you work for, right? So not only must you work, when we talk about privilege, I'm talking about the roles of man and woman that in the old days, you made reference to this too. Oftentimes women were at home taking care of the household, taking care of the children, but because of how society has changed and the expense of things and our perhaps desire as an couple to have certain things, it takes 2
Both
incomes.
parents have to work.
Correct.
A lot of
But it
times, and a
Go ahead.
woman or a wife or mother still have to maintain that expectation, but although they still working 40, 60 hours a week, and it's no balance, and that's a little control issue at that
Correct,
point.
correct. Mhm, right. So you have that power and control that still exists. Like, you go out and still bring home the bacon, and when you bring home this bacon, you're gonna put it in this account that I still have control over, right? And at the same token, don't forget you still gotta cook and clean because 'cause you're still responsible for the household also. So the other reference that the Duluth model gives, it talks about that economic abuse. In particular, it speaks to the person getting beat if she does not give her money or does not buy what the other party wants her to buy, goes to her job and creates a scene to try and get her fired from the job. Don't allow her to work and pay everything so that she has to depend on him, or takes her check or steals the money, the debit card, the food stamp card, manipulates her around the tax time. We often hear this, how, the abuser comes back and they get the new car every tax season, right? And then he's gone. And yes, I know I'm speaking in general. That's typically based upon a percentage of people who report abuse. That's typically how it goes. And we know that every man does not fall into that situation. And as I said, I have clients who are also males, so I know it goes the other way in some of the things that women do in this aspect. But this model does not necessarily speak to some of those behaviors because a lot of times it's underreported, or men too don't see themselves as being victims. But when you share this information, then they're like, oh, yeah, she did that too. So it's just having a conversation and putting it out there so that regardless of whether or not you deem yourself to be the abuser or the victim, these things happen across sex, they happen across income, they happen across race, it happens across age. Like, there are no barriers that says just because you are a particular makeup that you can't be abused or that you cannot be the abuser. And finally, the Duluth model speaks to threats or coercion. For example, it speaks to increased use of weapons around her in the community. A lot of times, abusers pull out their weapons, they're going to put it on the table. And while they may not tell you they're going to do anything with it, the mere fact that I can intimidate you, I can put you in a state of fear because I have this. And that's part of the legislation or part of the law that we have, at least in Louisiana, when we ask whether or not the person has a gun. And if the abuser is found to have a gun, then those guns have to be turned in to the police department so that they will not have that to use as a form of controlling the situation again. And threats to kill, they're going to kill you, they're going to kill themselves, they're going to kill your family. Making false police reports, sometimes, often, they try and beat the victim to make a record, right? So they're first to the court, they're first to the police department. And also, just because you defend yourself against abuse does not mean that you're an abuser. You have a right to defend yourself. Our hope through this conversation, and as we engage in domestic violence in general, is that you recognize the signs and you can escape it before you become a victim of that physical abuse. So a lot of times the intimidation, the emotional abuse, the isolation, like those things happen and people don't recognize it as domestic violence until that physical happened. And we're saying you don't have to wait until the physical happened. Recognize all of these signs. And let's talk about what are some strategies that people can use to remove themselves from it or to get some therapy through it so that at the end of it, when it comes to what I do on this show, in terms of co-parenting, how we can create a good recommendation for how to engage with the abuser, because the conversation also has to be just because perhaps they abuse one person doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be abusive to the child. We're concerned with those behaviors and we have to put some safeguards into place. But at what point, will that those parenting rights be taken away? And it's not necessarily taken away in civil court as opposed to in the state of Louisiana in juvenile court when there are allegations of abuse or neglect that the state brings to say, hey, the parent has crossed the line. And at this point, we're saying that he or she cannot engage with the child anymore. Until that happens in civil court, we're looking for just strategies to navigate through and giving the other person an opportunity because their behavior has not been blatant toward the child himself or herself. So, how do you navigate through that? What does it look like? Do you recognize yourself in being a victim? Do you recognize yourself as perhaps being a perpetrator of domestic violence? And how do we move forward to creating better situations for children that when they look at us to model behaviors, they're picking up all the best that we have to offer?
I will say a lot of individuals, once they are an adult, they may not have realized that they witnessed or have childhood trauma from things that they witnessed. They could have been in a two-parent household as well, but witnessed their mom, treating their dad a certain way or their dad treating their mom a certain way. But because they was raised watching that and raised in a situation, whether it was right or wrong, that's an expectation of life for them. Sometimes some children are in a situation and the mom could have just always been hard on that child, or having anxiety issues just because of what she was dealing with the father and kind of lashed out on her child because she was tired or this or that. And that child could have been in an emotional abusive state because of the mom's outpouring. And now, as an adult, they've brought that into their household and our jobs or careers, not realizing that they now have a negative connotation on women because of how their mom may have taught them. It's mental health, emotional behavior, statistics. It's a whole nother level of, I'll say, investigation. And I think that's why the current statistics and rate of mental health, suicide, domestic violence, and everything is so high, and there's a higher number of probably divorce rates, and an issue with co-parenting because a lot of it stems from a mental health aspect that we have not considered that may be a part of us or our inner childhood. And sometimes we don't want to admit it because of fear of being judged or fear of having a stigma and or not trusting a therapist and wanting to pay or can afford to go see therapy or therapist because it just seems as if I've heard people say, oh, they just trying to make me think their way. If you feel that you're in a setting with a counselor or therapist and they're trying to impose a certain thought on you, then try and seek another therapist because their job is to ask you the questions, allow you to work through the situations and assess you, but also allow you to come to that thought and have that voila moment and be like, okay, well, I am in this situation, or I did have childhood trauma, or I am acting out as this, or I'm not being fair, or I am purposely trying to hurt my partner while we're trying to co parent. So, therapy can be very influential in identifying why someone could be a partner, it can be a boss or a teacher, may see a behavior pattern that's not healthy for you And you may not know why you act that way. But once you go through counseling or therapy, I feel like that can help you kinda figure out what happened from childhood on up to adulthood and can help better you as a better parent or with co-parenting or even get into a relationship that's more healthier. As we spoke about, she's Judge Rose spoke on Louisiana's legislator. Of course, means with the statistics. Just in 2024, New Orleans reported 11,633 domestic incidents to the Advocate Initial Response Program, with over 4,200 being violent in nature. The New Orleans Police Department saw an overall 19% increase in both domestic violence incidents and domestic disturbance calls in 2024 compared to 2023. Though domestic homicide incidents decreased by 40% to 9 incidents from 15 in a previous year, domestic violence is the most commonly reported violent crime in Orleans Parish, accounting for the highest volume of 911. Um, just in 2024, like they said, it was 9 incidents of homicide, which decreased from the 15 in 2023. Already this year, we've had probably over 9 homicides and domestic violence cases. You know, those, factual statistics probably won't be out until next year, and I can attest for a lot of patients or clients coming in saying that they even called 911, a domestic hotline, but because I guess this volume and this number, looking at these numbers, I mean, they're so busy they can't get to you. These numbers are high, and it's still unaccounted for the ones who couldn't get through to 911 or the ones that couldn't get through to the domestic violence hotline. But I can
It's
foresee in the future, once everything is more out there and awareness is more out there, more programs will come about to be able to help individuals that's going through these issues and recognize it. Um, to better the situation. One thing I will say, I think some people don't take domestic violence serious because you do have that small factor or pocket of women that may say, okay, I'm gonna call the police on you. And it could be something minute or just to get back at a partner. And that's where that importance or that need or that drive for help and assistance may lie because some people abuse the situation, and that's kind of that intimidation thing, if they don't get what they want from the father, their child, or their man, that they may go ahead and say, okay, I'm gonna call 911 on you. And by them doing that, that brings the awareness level or a less important factor, I can say, into play and made
well,
the least of what happens.
well, you
I'm sorry.
spoke about the AIR program that exists in the city of New Orleans, and with those 11,000 phone calls to that particular system in the city of New Orleans. And I want to, it may be the state, and I'm not the statistics person, but it talks about a health crisis with the domestic violence that's happening. And last week we're in the month of October, we're 2025, and just last week there was an murder suicide, a homicide suicide with a young girl with domestic violence because it's an intimate partner relationship. But I want to say that I heard, and I couldn't find the statistics because they haven't compiled them yet, that maybe 5 this year, that's murder suicide around domestic violence. So you gave the statistics from last year, but just listening to everything that's happening, I foresee that number increasing. We're in October, and every day, I think I heard yesterday, and I'm not quite sure where this report will go, but there was another shooting behind an domestic violence. So every day we know that reports are made, and whether or not um, people are recognizing domestic violence, sometimes they report things that may not be physical because it falls into one of those emotional abuse situations or isolation and intimidation. And they may not rise to a charge of criminal domestic violence, but they're making more reports of domestic violence. Some of it they can get relief from the police department and from the DA's office, And some of it, the law doesn't provide relief from. So we know that there are agencies across this city that provide some relief. So let me just share those. We have the Family Justice Center of New Orleans. That's a wraparound agency that provides assistance with domestic violence. We also know that there's a national hotline that victims could call, and I want to share that number, and I'll post both of those numbers up at the end of this session. But the National Domestic Violence Hotline is 8, which is 7233. So 1-800-799-7233. That's the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And I'll also post the Family Justice Center, Domestic Violence Center that's available where we live in the city of New Orleans. That could provide some relief if you see yourself as a victim. Now, on the perpetrator side, there are not many services that are available to the perpetrator and trying to get assistance. We know that that needs to happen. There are few that the criminal court typically make those perpetrators attend. But perhaps the best advice that I can share is that if you recognize yourself, get some therapy. Is there a particular number you can share or an agency that you can provide where people can begin to flush out where they can get some therapy treatment from either as the victim or either as the perpetrator to work on that childhood trauma that I, I'm assuming is connected to the level of violence that they may be inflicting on their victim?
The Family Justice Center, as you mentioned, I mean, that's a great place to start for either victim or not, because they have relationships with programs like Hope and different places that can offer therapy to the individual, but along with the kids, because what we don't realize, a lot of behaviors and things that we have going on as adults, it falls back on the kids. So they do have a lot of programs, or I mean, I'll say some. We already know there's a mental health crisis and a decrease in the city or the state or the country right now. But I can say over the past few years that mental health awareness has been put out there. So the urgency and need for the mental health crisis is now being heard and seen. So there are going to have more availability coming up. I mean, if you have private insurance, of course, you can go to any PCP could refer you to certain places. Medicaid, Medicare automatically will go ahead and take care of issues if you just make it alert to your primary care physician. Something popped in this case specific data, okay, of course, me with my statistics again. Just when you mentioned the DA office and stuff. In 2021, the Metro Crime Commission found that the Orleans Parish District Attorney refused to prosecute a third, which is 32% of all felony domestic violence cases, and another 20% were pled down to misdemeanors. A 2023 analysis of strangulation related cases showed that 349 individuals were charged with domestic abuse battery involving strangulation, but only 3.3% were convicted of strangulation. And another funny fact, it's very hot and humid down here in New Orleans. A study found that prolonged periods of extreme heat in New Orleans may lead to an increase in domestic violence and related emergency calls. I think because we live in that fight or flight mode or anxiety or just everyday life stressors in combination with the heat and uncomfortability, sometimes our temper, our anxiety could automatically lead into some type of violence, whether it's domestic violence or whatever violence or partner, friend violence. That's things we have to be mindful for. But in addition, because domestic violence, like I said, is taken serious, and due to the Stark program, which decreased in homicides despite an increase reported of incidents, domestic homicide saw a significant 40% drop from the 15 to 9, like I mentioned in 2024. And that was partly due to the updated NOPD counting methods that now includes both phone and 911 source calls, leading to more accurate totals. But a lot of those offenders or a lot of people still get away with things because once it does get to court or the DA, like it says, it's pled down or
Right. Sometimes they do diversions, sometimes they don't accept them, sometimes, there's not enough evidence to prove it, right? So, it's not to say it didn't happen, it's whether or not you can prove it in a court that it happened. So, we would still encourage the, victim to report, continue to report. And if there are no relief that's available in criminal court, then there are options that are available in civil court that the Family Justice Center can help provide some of those resources to those victims. So just because you can't skin a cat one way doesn't mean that you don't try. And there are different avenues. So we're going to talk about that because when it comes to custody, that's over in civil court. And when it comes to domestic violence and needing to prove out how you're going to parent, right? Those are remedies that are available in civil court as opposed to what the police department can do. Because so often we hear that people are calling the police and the police shows up, and sometimes people are calling thinking that they're reporting some crime, and they may be, and they're told, oh, that's a civil matter. So we're still struggling with that. So we just want to try and continue to educate NOPD. We want to try and continue to educate the community that, what's civil is for civil and what's for criminal is for criminal. So continue to make your reports, continue to say what that person did that you believe is criminal, find relief through NOPD, then perhaps you need to reach out to the DA directly to see whether or not somebody can convince or hear the crime that you think you are suffering with or impacted by. And that it's not always civil that you have to go to civil court. But let's talk about if you have to go and how you navigate that, because at the end of the day, research says that children are best served when they have both their parents in their lives. And I always say we don't get to choose our parents, right? So we don't get to filter out all of the trauma that they have not dealt with and how that has an impact on us, which is why children may need counseling too. And through the Family Justice Center, you can get that for your children. I would suggest that there's a schedule that's created because oftentimes that power and control happens when people just want to pop up. So they want to pop up and see the child. No, create a schedule that you all are going to follow for victims of domestic violence, that you don't put yourself around your perpetrator, around your abuser. So you do exchanges at schools where you pick children up from schools and you drop them off at school. That way you don't have to be around the victim or the perpetrator. Sometimes you have to do what we call third-party exchanges, where a third party is the person when school's not in session, or if your schedule doesn't allow pickup or drop off at school, then you get a third party to navigate that for you. Now, that third party is not a mediator because with abusive relationships, the law does not allow for mediation. You're not trying to mediate a situation with your abuser. That's giving the person the power that they're trying to control you with. So we just use third parties to pick up and drop off. For communication, if there's a need to continue to communicate with that person, it's through some written form, either text or an app, and it's always questions that you are posing, not your summary of how you're feeling and what you should do when the child is with you. Again, you're navigating, and some of my earlier recordings, I talk about the 3 lanes of either navigating that intimate relationship lane that's ended, or the co-parenting lane, or the parenting lane. So when you realize that you have to step into co-parenting, but you're co-parenting with an issue of domestic violence, then you have to have some safeguards around that. So we do third-party exchanges. We try and do exchanges at schools. If that doesn't work, then it could be at the police station. Sometimes they have the designated area where people go and do the exchanges, that they have the cameras. You let the child walk to the person's car. You don't get out of your vehicle. If the child is younger and a child can't walk, then we would suggest you go up inside of the police station and let NOPD, in this case, be a part of, or at least get to witness what that exchange looks like. But if the child is able to go from one car to the next, you just let that happen. Again, the best place is at school. When school is not in session, you use a third party, text or use an app, and again, have a schedule. That way, everybody knows when the child is supposed to go from one parent to the next parent, getting those children the counseling that they need, getting yourself into counseling that you need, with the hope that the abuser too is working on himself or herself to create a better atmosphere and a better environment. At some point, people will re-engage because your children are going to be your children forever. And even when they become adults, there are still situations where grandchildren may come or graduations may come, and you have to find yourself in a setting that's common. And how do you navigate that? So work on your healing. Make sure that your children are working, you're advocating for their healing, and also that you have a schedule that you're sticking to in terms of making sure as long as the parent wasn't abusive to the child, that parent will probably still have access to that child.
This is my final takeaway. Of course, the healing side of it all. Whether the NOPD come, don't come, drop the charges. You still gotta make sure you know that you are important if you've done all you can. So my 5 tips to help you recover from domestic violence. Number 1, leaving a domestic violence situation is one of the most bravest decisions that you can make. Connecting with others and spending time with nature and rebuilding a sense of safety can help improve your well-being. Number 1, build a sense of safety. With that, you just may have to just, as I'm going to expound on what Judge Rose said, secure living arrangements, having self-affirmations, and setting small goals that'll provide direction and motivation and helping you regain a sense of control and purpose in your life because sometimes you lose that. Number 2, connect with others. Connecting with others after leaving a domestic violence situation is crucial for healing and rebuilding and having a great support network. Sharing with others provides emotional validation. It helps the process of trauma and it combats feelings of isolation because most times you've been isolated from your family and friends. So once you are able to reconnect with your family or friends, or if you don't have family and friends to reconnect to, or they don't want to invite you back in because they're feeling some kind of way, there are support groups out there. And as Judge Rose say, counseling, and start building new relationships. You can engage in activities or hobbies that's interesting to you, such as art, karate classes, going to the museum, joining book clubs, and meeting new people in safe and supportive environments. Because, with time, life grows, people grow, everybody they get wrapped into their own. And like I say, the friends you once had or relationships you once had with family members coming out of an extensive long period of domestic violence, it may have changed over time and it's okay for you to go out and meet new people. Um, don't forget to connect with nature. Engaging with nature, such as going to a park, a beach, a forest, or a garden, can support your emotional, mental well being as you recover. Holistic engagements can be something, cognitive and emotional benefits it offers, physical mastery, and narrative reconstruction. I have a short joke. I try to do grounding, just a part of my daily, like, stressful life, and I call myself going to City Park here. I was in the grass, grounding, getting in touch with nature, shoes, feet off. Then all of a sudden, all these ants came and bit me up, and everything, my legs, everything. So just be careful with your nature aspect.
Was wondering if the nature aspect could be me driving to City Park and sitting in the car, like, must I?
Yeah, that's fine too, but they have this thing grounding, like walk barefoot in the grass, like it's a different feeling. And I really did feel calmness come over me sitting in the grass until probably about 15 minutes I started scratching. And then next thing you know, I had all these bumps. I was like, damn, I meditated. I got that calm. I didn't realize I was sitting in an ant pile. But anyway, that's just a little funny joke that I'm going through right now because it's like week 4 and I still itching, got these bumps everywhere. But nature really do calm your soul. I like water, but, some people may not like water, but I tried the park thing, and I had a calmness overcoming outside of them ants, but I was too calm.
Put that on my to-do list.
Uh-huh, what? Go
And
take
get
off
a
your shoes, go
snowball?
grass. You could get a snowball, uh-huh. Number 4, connect with self. Connecting with yourself after leaving a domestic violence situation is crucial for healing and rebuilding and a sense of identity and self-worth. You can start by journaling. I'm a big advocate of journals. You can go to www.franklinpublication.com. I have several journals and self-healing journals there. All my friends, my family, my students, my staff members, they'll let you know journaling is something I always impose. Write it out your mind, read it later on, evaluate your growth, throw that away. I'm a big advocate for journaling. Hobbies, again, go to art class, karate, a pole dance class, acrobat, the art museum. You never know what the new self coming out of that relationship has adapted to and what can calm yourself and give yourself that self work. Don't worry about judgment from others because now you're on a self healing journey at this type. You want to go to the pole dance class, pole fitness. I mean, it is what it is. And remember, give yourself some self-compassion. Treat yourself with kindness and understanding. Acknowledge your strength and resilience in leaving that DV situation. Avoid self-blame at all costs and recognize that healing is a journey. Allow yourself to feel a range of emotions without judgment because you will feel emotions. Remember to grace yourself. And that's something that I myself, just with being like an overachiever, and let's say something fails or I don't accomplish a goal or something that I really wanted to do, I had to learn to grace myself because when life happens, it happens, but it ain't the end of it. So just remember, so you're resilient, give yourself that time, experience your emotions, and grace yourself. And my last tip, connect with a higher power. Many recovery programs, such as Alcoholics Anonymous, encourage individuals to seek encouragement and strength from a higher power. This often involves a search for peace, guidance, and strength beyond oneself. It could be meditation, it can be gratitude and positive thinking, or mindfulness practice. It don't always have to be spiritual and philosophical when they say that higher power because we know everybody have their different belief systems. But that's the last tip. Connect with something. Everybody needs that something to connect with. And it's a small little takeaway. Leaving a domestic violence situation is a significant step towards ensuring your safety and well-being for you and for your kids. Although the two-parent household is very much ideal, we don't realize how much endangerment of physical, emotional health, and abuse that we're putting on our kids as well.
Those are some good tips, KJ, that you left our audience with. And we're hopeful that all of the information that we shared today, again, somebody will recognize either they're fine or maybe they see themselves as being abused or either also being an abuser. But whatever situation that person's in, there is help that's available to navigate it so that they could become the whole person and the best form of themselves that they want to, but it requires work. So self-work first is recognizing that you have a problem or that there is a problem and then figuring out how to navigate that. So you and I have talked for an hour and I think it's good information, and I'm looking forward to sharing it. I'll add in the national hotline for domestic violence along with the local Family Justice Center for people to make a reference to. And again, you can find KJ through her publishing company. You want to give your where the guests or where the audience may be able to connect with you at?
You can always visit www.franklinpublication.com. I post blogs that's mental health based. There's a wide variety of different things that I talk about: body imaging, journaling, affirmations, domestic violence, surviving a narcissist, grief from parent, grief from divorce. There's a variety of things. You could join a membership. I have some free courses and things on it as paid programs. And of course, all the books and journals that I publish is also on that website. I can also be found on Facebook under Franklin Publication, Instagram Franklin Publication, and as a variety of things. But the best way to stay tuned is just subscribe to www.franklinpublication.com. Please visit and read some of those blogs. You never know what may help you in that time of need or what may be of interest or pique your interest. Judge Rowe knows she and I, we could talk for hours. And I mean, we'll probably have another session, but I wanted Imma leave it alone for right now. But I don't know if y'all ever heard of this term, like, a elephant is stuck in a room, but, elephant is so big, but why they trapped in that room or trapped in that situation? And I feel like that's a great story or analogy for you to look into because it has to do with that emotional, the intimidation that the owner imposed on them, although the elephant is so huge. Elephants are very smart.
All right, we're gonna last time we did this, you reminded me that we did 4 hours, so we're doing an hour at a time. So this is the first hour for 2025, and I'm going to invite you back, and we'll pick up on that conversation about the intimidation with the, elephant. But in wrapping up, I would share with the audience that if you listen to this podcast or this, taping, that mean you found me on one of the social medias, either the website www.coparent.com, our Facebook, which is Co-Parent Court. We're on YouTube. You can find this recording on which is CO hyphen parent court, Twitter at Co-Parent Court, or Instagram Co-Parent Court. And if you have any topic or if you want to come and have a discussion with me, email me at Judge Rowe. That's JUDGERO at coparentcourt.com. And we can perhaps figure out how we can engage in sharing information about all things co-parenting or any particular topic as we decided to do this time. In particular, we focused on domestic violence. And I want to thank you for listening, audience. And again, thank you, KJ, for giving us some time this year to talk about domestic violence. And if you want to do taping 2 or 3, let's figure out how to get that into the schedule. So thank you, guys. If you need to contact either the National Hotline for Domestic Violence or the Family Justice Center in New Orleans, please use the information that's at the end of this recording. And have a great day.